Good afternoon and welcome to today's Fire Engineering Humpday Hangout for December 27th, 2023. And Frank, Richie, and I have a little role reversal today, and I'm doing the lead off. I didn't have a monologue prepared, so we're going to have to scrap that for today. But welcome to our last show of 2023. And, we're excited. We've had a great year of hosts and guests and topics, some less controversial, some a little bit more controversial, as you would expect with Frank and I. Today's will fall kind of in the middle. Could be so controversial for some of you, and some of you may not see the issue. But today we brought Curt Varone on board, and Curt Varone is a long friend of ours as well as the show. He has over 40 years experience in the fire service. He served, I think it was 29 years as a career firefighter in Providence, Rhode Island. Retired as deputy assistant chief, which is a shift commander. He's a practicing attorney in both Rhode Island and Maine. He served as director of public fire protection division at NFPA. He's authored 2 books. He's pretty much the fire service lawyer, not the kitchen table firehouse lawyer that we all know. Curt is a true fire service lawyer, and I said he's been a friend to us, an advocate for us, somebody that Frank and I have both utilized for questions, both personally and professionally. So, Curt, thank you for joining us today, and Merry Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas, and thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate being with you two.
It's great having Curt on. So here's the thing. Regardless of how you feel about my politics, the one thing that nobody could fault me on is I know how to hire great attorneys. I've never lost a case at the labor board. I've never lost a legal challenge, and I've been involved in about 8 on both sides of them. So I know how to pick out a great attorney. And you got to realize something about lawyers. If you want to know a profession that's wrong 50% of the time, walk into any courtroom. One lawyer's right, one lawyer's wrong. Curt is the guy I went to train my executive board when I was the union president. Instead of spending my union members' money so I could go to Vegas or Hawaii, I said, you know what, let's take that money. Let's get Curt Varone in, because for union reps and for managers, and also I think one of the missing links is I think that the unions are starting to get keyed in that they need training, and we'll talk about that. But managers need training, but they look to somebody like Curt Varone at the wrong time. They look to somebody like Curt Varone, a great attorney, somebody who could provide great training after there's a problem, or to train their chief officers, when a lot of times it's the company officers, those lower level managers, that create bad facts for the labor director and for the chief. So I really encourage in your officer training, we need tactics, but we also need human resources training so they're not making the same mistakes. And if you're a company officer or you're a firefighter, you want to be a company officer, and you want to be great at your job, you want to be a leader, start following him, read his books, take a look at his social media, because the issues that happen in Alabama, California, or Connecticut, it's all the same. And we see people repeat the same mistakes over and over again. You want to be a leader, you got to be able to lead in the right direction, and following somebody like Curt Varone, that's the way to go. PJ.
What a great commercial. Thank you.
Well, Curt, luckily recording that, so you can just hijack it off the internet.
There we go. I got Frank's endorsement.
Yeah,
you got my endorsement. Like I said, we could have brought in anybody, and you got enough experience where you can look at things on both sides of the issue. You're somebody who doesn't come across real political, and you can just speak to the law and really help, I think, even more people than you're helping, because a lot of people don't think they need help, and those are the ones that are dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely. And my good friend Billy Goldfeder, I kind of consider myself still to be an operations oriented guy, engine, by the way. So, but I'm ops oriented, and I know how Billy G looks at firefighter fatalities and tries to figure out, okay, we had a firefighter killed. This is how it happened. Let's look at what happened and what could we have done to prevent that from happening. And I take the same approach. Just I would love to be able to do it operationally, but what I do is on lawsuits, and I look at, okay, here we got a lawsuit. What could we have done? What were the things that led to this? And then the same methodology Billy uses, what could we do to prevent this from happening again? And you do that for one case, and then you do it for another case, you do it for another. And after a while, you start to say, holy cow, we've got a lot of common things happening that are leading to these things, that if we can educate folks both on the administration side And on the union side, and in the volunteer world as well, we can prevent these lawsuits from happening.
Yeah, and I agree, and that kind of brings us to why we're here today. So the what we brought Curt on for is something that's going on in the fire service, but what brought it to my attention is a something that the Supreme Court is currently hearing or just recently heard regarding social media, not for the fire service. It involved Board of Education officials. So the U.S. Supreme Court is exploring free speech rights in the social media era on to consider whether the Constitution's First Amendment bars government officials from blocking their critics on platforms like Facebook and Twitter. The justices took up an appeal by two members of a public school board from the city of Poway in Southern California of a lower court's ruling in favor of school parents who sued after being blocked from Facebook pages and a Twitter or now X account maintained by those officials. And while this may not be something that many of you are concerned with, I manage the Fire Academy social media pages. I've made it a practice of not deleting any comments or posts, not hiding any comments posts unless they're really derogatory or they're attacking or bullying somebody, and usually message those individuals, which doesn't really happen. Message them first, give them that opportunity to delete it on their own because of things like this, right? So while this occurred in the Board of Ed world in California, there's a lot of fire service representatives that follow our show that really don't have that training or education on social media and how to use it properly. Yeah, we all have heard of the stories of the firefighters or police officers or EMS who, comment inappropriately or say something really, really wrong, and that impacts their career. And I know, Curt, I've heard you and Billy call it that social media assisted career suicide. And I think this is a little bit different. This goes into more of the managing and monitoring of those pages as well. So I'd love to hear from you as far as the administration side of those pages, as far as deleting and blocking individuals. But also, I think that we can all use a little tune-up every once in a while on the appropriate use and inappropriate use of social media in the fire service.
Yeah, and it kind of goes to the heart of the First Amendment connection with government work, and really, you say, well, how does the First Amendment apply to social media? What's it got to do with it? And I think if we kind of step away from the technology and look at the principle of it, and the Supreme Court has done this, many of the circuit courts have said it as well, is that social media is the equivalent of the town square. And that when you think about an old New England town, Frank, all three of us are from New England. So, you get into the old town square kind of deal. And when you have government officials using the town square to say things in a capacity, in their governmental capacity, and then they want to silence their critics, we're starting to get into censorship. And while certainly if someone is going to be threatening people in the town square, there's got to be some rules as far as what you can do. And certainly, certain types of hate speech and threats and other things would not be protected by the First Amendment. But criticism, it really belongs in the town square. Okay, so you kind of take that principle, which has been evolving for a couple of hundred years, and now apply it to the new technology. And places like Facebook and your website, if you have that kind of a fixed platform, is the new town square. And we're not talking about private industry where you're talking about maybe Coca-Cola or UPS or any of the private industry types of people blocking people, but we're talking about government. And when government tries to cut off someone's ability to raise concerns, then there's certainly a First Amendment issue there. It's really censorship.
I think that's a really good point. And I mean, it goes back to our founding father that was a firefighter, Ben Franklin, with Apologies for the Printer, where, facts and error need to be out there and let the public decide. We need coaching debate in our republic to have a quality Republican, constitutional Republican that leads to kind of a democracy. It's a form of democracy, but we need that coaching debate. But I do caution people out there, and I know we're going to talk about posting as a government official and as a firefighter, all those things too. But, I caution you, don't do anything that makes you feel good when you're angry, number one. And
That's my favorite Frank Ritchie quote.
and number two, social media should be your personality after one beer, not six. Okay. But, I mean, those two simple rules will get you out of a lot of trouble. And I like Michael Aberoff's, the individual that wrote It's Your Ship. You know, if you're going to put something out there, his quote of, would you be proud if it was in the front page above the fold in the Washington Post? Could you justify it and defend it? Well, if you're doing that, you're going to put yourself in a much better position. I think we should be able to criticize our leaders. That's what makes America America. The fact that we can disagree while still being agreeable is so important to our republic, but we should have a little bit of class in the process.
Yeah, and I think this speaks to the need for what's, I think the conventional term is called a moderation policy. So a moderation policy, if you have a website, you should have a moderation policy. And when someone posts something that is, let's use a shorthand word that is probably not a great, it's not a great phrase, but we're talking about hate speech. And I know the Supreme Court has kind of taken issue with that, saying it's a little bit too broad, that we really need to narrow it. But if we kind of understand what hate speech is, you want to make sure that the person who's got to make that decision to delete someone or delete a comment has a place to go to evaluate it. And that's really what they call a moderation policy. So you want to have that kind of a policy. And, certainly things, if someone's threatening harm to someone or threatening harm to certain groups, that may be cause for removing them from, a good cause for removing them from the platform or deleting certain comments. Or another thing is spam, people posting spam. And I think that, I know I get it on my blog. I'm sure you get it on your different platforms, and then other forms of harassing and untruth, things that are just factually not true. The flat worlders, that are out there spreading that. So I think you want to have a good, sound moderation policy, and then it's not one particular person. Maybe a deputy chief in the fire department, and the union is private industry. Even though we're public employees, the union's website is private industry, but they still should probably have a moderation policy as well, because there's a lot of people out there that dislike unions, and they're going to be posting things. So you want to have some sort of a policy that the person who's going to be managing the content is going to refer to. And then if a mistake is made and somebody takes issue with it, you go back and say, okay, we're going to look at the policy, and then maybe we'll adjust the policy to address this going forward.
That's a good litmus test, and something that I haven't considered, but having that moderation policy is probably, is of course solid advice, and while I agree that, the criticism is good, right? Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes what happens is, being a firefighter, somebody's not going to criticize me, and then you want to react. Well, screw them. We're just going to delete that comment, or screw them. We're going to block them from our page, because kind of that ego takes over of somebody disagreeing with you. But right. There's a real value, and Frank and I have talked about this. That it seems like the day of disagreeing with somebody and still being friends with them has gone away. Yeah. Frank and I don't agree on everything, but we're very close. Right? Consider Frank one of my best friends, and we don't agree on everything. He doesn't agree with everything on me, but that seems to be few and far between now. And I think that's really highlighted on social media with having the ability, I don't agree with that individual, and delete.
Yeah, there's something about being in the same room with somebody and having a disagreement, but remaining agreeable. And you have that lack of proximity that happens in social media. In fact, maybe even a lack of accepting another person's humanity, and I think that is a function of the technology. And there's a lot going on when it comes to what's going on in social media. Same thing with emails, where people would never say something face to face to somebody, but they have no problem putting like nasty stuff in an email,
Curt, do you know what the E in email stands for?
Electronic, I thought, but
No, evidence. And it's no different from your Twitter or anything else. You can't delete it. It will be found. So think about before you send something. On your moderation point, I just want to point something out, is that it always comes down to the moderator and who's the decision maker on the truth. I mean, let's be honest, and it's not one political party, because the Republicans are just as guilty as the Democrats, but government has been the biggest purveyor of misinformation, all the way from the Bush administration to weapons of mass destruction.
Oh, it goes way back. I'm sure it goes, you know,
it goes way back on both sides. So
absolutely,
when you do a policy, you got to make sure there are things that I think how you got to view the policy is dispassionate, and it's got to be a policy that, you know, if somebody says something racist, everybody can agree when there's no passion that nobody should be making a racist comment about somebody. But you got to make sure that you're not actually chilling speech. And what comes to mind is the vaccine mandates was where they chilled speech. It wasn't something that was hate speech, but and now it turned out that a bunch of the conspiracy theories turned out to be true. You know, the vaccine stopped from getting it as bad, but it didn't stop transmission like we were told. So, you know, I'll leave it with this, and then I'll turn it back to PJ. But a quote from Orwell from 1984 has always stuck with me, and it says, "But if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought." And I think censorship is always bad unless it's in the extreme and it's done by policy in a dispassionate way. And if you look back to our quality history, we often took speech that we didn't like, wasn't hate, but that we didn't like, and we kind of made it our own. Like when Lafayette had the French and the Americans play Yankee Doodle Dandy at the surrender of Yorktown, because that's what the British used to use as a slight to us. But they didn't ban Yankee Doodle Dandy. Now it's actually Connecticut's state song, when it was actually a slight to New England. So I think it's important that we got to be dispassionate when we put forth a policy, that we're not silencing just language that we disagree with. It's got to be language that is really offensive, that you'd be able to justify in a court. Your thoughts on that?
I think what you're getting at, the Supreme Court has actually used the term content neutral. So it has to be content neutral. It's not going to take one side or the other. Facts can be false on both sides, you know, and then the difference between a fact and a perspective, you know, it can be hard to discern. And Frank, I'm going to make an assumption. I don't know about PJ, but I'm going to make, and actually you're right around the same area. Are you a Yankee fan?
Is there any other type of fan?
Okay, so there we go. And so when you and I are sitting at Fenway Park or Yankee Stadium, and we see a close play at second base, we're going to perceive it differently, at least until the instant replay comes up, okay? Neither one of us is lying, but we're going to perceive it differently. And so, you know, facts they shouldn't be relative, but they are from your perspective. People are going to see things differently. And so that part of speech, we've got to be very careful about, because two people can see something happen. Two people can study something in depth. You can have two doctors examine a patient, and they come up with different conclusions about what the patient's condition is. So people can differ, but still, from their perspective, be factually accurate, you know, correct. So we want to be careful about that. But then there are things that are utterly false, such as Tom Brady's never won a Super Bowl. Okay, there you go. Okay, so I mean that's palpably false. Okay. So there's certain things, and I get into this. I know this is a sensitive issue, and I'm really glad we can talk about it here, because we can't talk about it on another platform called YouTube. But COVID, you cannot talk about COVID at the risk of getting banned. And Brad Pinsky and I, you know, we do a little thing on YouTube every Monday. And once we talked about a lawsuit involving COVID, and Brad basically was reading from the complaint. Somebody was suing, and we were going over the allegations, and we got hit, and we got told, if you talk about that again, I know it's outrageous. And so we just, I don't even cover COVID cases in it anymore, because I'll do it in my blog, but we'll say, well, it's the C word, because Facebook will ban you from talking about COVID. And it's, again, it's YouTube is private industry, so they can do whatever they want. If government tried to do that, we'd be talking about a First Amendment suit.
And we're seeing that around the country, where government uses private industry as a proxy, and that's being litigated now as well.
Yeah.
So that's on the forefront of what's going on, and what governments
well, Silicon Valley and and the folks that are running YouTube are certainly on one side of the political spectrum. So,
Curt, one of the issues that I see sometimes individuals have trouble balancing is their personal Facebook page versus their department or their agency Facebook page.
Yeah.
And I would encourage, and I'd like to see if you agree, that if you're going to manage social media for a department or an agency, that needs to be the department or the agency. And your personal page needs to be your personal page, and you should be cross-sharing things. So if I post something for the Connecticut Fire Academy, I don't then go share that from my personal page, because now it's no longer my personal page. And trying to have that clear separation of the two, I think, is an important lesson for some. But some people say, well, I want to try to get more clicks or more likes or more follows, so I'm going to share it also. I think that can be counterintuitive.
Yeah, it can. And there's we're going to go in two different directions on this now. So one of them is the First Amendment issue. Okay. And let's put that one on hold. The disciplinary issue. Okay. Because if I run a government website, and I have my private website, I want to distance myself from my public employment as much as I can, so that I don't get myself in trouble for things I post on my personal website or my personal social media presence. Okay. Because I don't want to get myself in trouble. So that's more of a disciplinary issue. The First Amendment issue gets us back to the town square. Okay. And for example, let's use Joe Biden. Can Joe Biden have the president of the United States at the at the town hall or the town square? He's going to be president of the United States, and then kind of take his hat off and then step to the same microphone and say, "Oh, I'm going to speak as the private citizen from the same place." And you really can't. And I think that's going to be the crux of the issue in the case that you're talking about whether or not these elected officials who may be using their private email or private social media presence, and they're having discussions with their constituents, which once you start having those discussions with your constituents, you're back to the town square. Regardless of what you call yourself, regardless of how you characterize yourself, you're back at the town square. Now you're going to be silencing people, some people, from having those kinds of discussions that other people are free to have. And now you're getting into content-based restrictions. So again, I think for disciplinary purposes, I agree with you 100%. You want to keep your business, your fire department connection to social media separate from your personal connection. That way, if you post something that somebody takes offense to, you did it as a private citizen, and then you have some First Amendment protection. But when you are using your identity in the town square, and you're letting some people comment but not others, you run into that First Amendment issue. And hopefully the Supreme Court is going to give us a little bit better guidance than what we've got right now as to how to draw that distinction.
Yeah, because it does seem vague now, and I caution firefighters out there, is some people think that if you put on your Twitter page, the opinions are my own and not of my employer, that's some golden shield. And there's not a legal case that I've seen yet, unless you can educate me, that says that is a shield, because it's really not. You have to be responsible of what you post.
No, and like I said, it's like Joe Biden being at the public square. He's at the town square. He's given a speech, and then he steps off the podium, and then steps back onto the podium and says, I'm going to speak as Joe Biden, the citizen now. You can't. You just can't do that. And I've got a good case out of Massachusetts where a chief made some statements. He made the statements at a fire scene, at a fatal fire, in his turnout gear, and he addressed the public. And the court said you were acting as a spokesperson for the fire department pretty clearly, okay? And we go back, as we talk about it in class, we say, okay, what if he took his helmet off? Does that make him not the fire chief? Can he take his helmet off and say, I want to speak as the citizen, I don't want to speak as the fire chief? Just taking your helmet off, do it. What if you take your helmet and your jacket off? What if you take your helmet, your jacket, all your collar hardware, and you text the mayor, say, put me on vacation? Does that make you a private citizen? And I think there's certain people, in particular, the fire chief, who just cannot ever step outside of that role. They may not even have to identify themselves, but they're going to be recognized as the fire chief. And that goes along with the turf. And, PJ's another one. I mean, you're in a very high profile position, and it'd be very hard for you to be able to say something and have it not get immediately connected back to your employment.
PJ's good. The most dangerous thing he does is appear next to me, but
that can be dangerous. Depending on what they're coming after you with.
I tell PJ all the time, I say, there's a lot of fire chiefs in every state, but there's only one director of training in every state. So it's definitely a position of esteem, and you got to be careful. And I love the guys and the girls in the fire department who say, not associated with the fire department, these opinions are my own. And then there's a picture of them in their fire gear, and every post is about fires. And so
I know. And we use a metaphor when I teach. We use a little metaphor of an umpire, and I don't know if you remember the Naked Gun movie, but Leslie Nielsen is the umpire. And we reference that metaphor just because, to me, that's the judge. And I can't predict what a guy like Leslie Nielsen is going to say. Oh yeah, Frank was acting as Frank as a private citizen. Oh no, Frank was acting as an assistant chief of the fire department. And who knows what a judge is going to say, and who knows what evidence you're going to be able to present, and how it's going to be received, and who's going to show up for court, and all the things that in real life get in the way of justice. Who knows? And the judge may just say, you know what, I'm not going to go in that direction. I'm going to go in this direction, and you lose. So I think your initial advice about things you need to think about before you post something is really the most important takeaway.
And a lot of things you can post on if you do it in a responsible way, like you were going to be quoted in a newspaper. If you think about it like that, you can weigh in on some weighty issues and feel that you're going to be able to justify that comment. It's when you're putting up the meme that has some context that people are going to take in different directions, where we see elected officials, firefighters, fire chiefs get themselves in trouble when, wait, you don't need to be the one to put out the meme. Is it really going to make that big of a difference whether you put out this meme or not? You're always going to be associated with your organization. And I'm all for the First Amendment, but you have to have some common sense on how that goes, as well as being an employee.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, and I agree. And there's nothing more that I can add. Is it's challenging at times, because we all have opinions. And for those, you guys know me, I have a lot of opinions, and often those aren't opinions that a lot of other people agree with. And we always want to use those social media platforms in the way that we would like to use them and share our opinions. But we just can't always do that just off the whim. Like Frank says, you want to be thoughtful about it, do it appropriate, think your comment through, look at it from a different vision. Great. But when you start really getting into, debates and banter, and especially if, like in a position like mine or on your agency's social media, you really have to use caution there, because it could come back to haunt you.
Yeah. There's an interesting case out of, I don't even want to name the department, but a captain in the firehouse, the night of the Black Lives Matter protests that shut down the interstates across the country, posted on Facebook, I think it was. He said, if good thing I'm at work, otherwise I'd run you over. And if you get in front of my car, I'm going to run you over, and that type of thing. Okay. And, he ended up getting terminated and big lawsuit and all that. But the local newspaper, who, if there's anyone who's going to come out in support of the First Amendment, it's going to be newspapers, because newspapers live and die on our First Amendment. All you got to do is look at what's going on in Russia and the censorship that goes on in Russia and the control that the government has over that, to understand the implications of it. But the newspaper said that if all he had said was that it's not appropriate to shut down the interstate highways, we would support his First Amendment right to say that. But when you go beyond just saying you disagree with it and threaten to run people over or encourage other people to run people over, you've crossed the line. And I think that's it's a really good way to kind of think about it. And you have a First Amendment right to voice your opinion. Okay. I think one way on COVID. I think another way on COVID. You have a right to say that. That's fine. But when you start getting into that angry rhetoric and threatening, that's where you're going to get into trouble. And I think it's a good way to kind of characterize where you have protection and where you don't.
I think that's very well said, and that makes perfect sense. That's a reasonable argument. You can feel comfortable making that argument in court that we shouldn't close down the road because we need first responders to help everybody out. We can't impede an ambulance. But once you say you're going to run, so that's where it goes too far. And you're going to be held, like somebody's going to hold you accountable, and you're going to have to defend the action. So why not establish good facts? And I'm sure in this firefighter's heart or captain's heart, he didn't want people to go running over. It was an off the cuff remark, but here it had major consequences. And a lot of times people don't realize is that even if you're successful in the end, what a journey and what a tragedy that you go through to be successful. I mean, I was being sued by an assistant chief speaking as the president of the union for comments made in the paper that I would say again tomorrow. The judge thankfully threw out the case. But what do you call it? You got to be real careful of what you say and make sure that you have your facts so that you can defend them. It's just the reality, because while you may have the right to say it, they have the right to sue you.
Mm-hmm. That's how it is.
Now, how do you see now this case before the Supreme Court? Do you think it'll have any impact on, and I forget the case name, but there was a balancing test when you were speaking on a matter of public concern. Is it Pickering?
On Pickering?
Yeah,
it could. It could. I hadn't really made the connection there, and I'm not totally familiar with the cases that you're talking about. It's not something I've studied. I study firefighters. This is not firefighters. So, but it does. You're absolutely right. It does connect, and it is going to impact us. So, in Pickering, truthfully, Pickering did not involve firefighters either. But Pickering is that balancing test. I think from what I did read about those cases and it's not clear to me, were they using the school board's social media platform, or were they using the personal platform? Okay.
So they were, for what I read from it, Chief, was they were using their personal social media, and
Okay.
I could be wrong because I haven't studied also,
Right.
but also they've used their personal social media to discuss items.
Bingo.
As you were saying before, right? So let me see what I grabbed here. I didn't grab it from the article, but that was my understanding of it. They were using their personal social media, but they were talking from their position of Board of Ed. And again, I could be wrong on that, but that was what I took out of it.
Well, if you're using your personal social media presence for work, okay, for the public's work, because when you're an elected official or you're a public employee, you're doing work when you're having conversations with constituents. And when you're having those conversations, even though you're using your private, social media page or whatever it may be, you're doing public work, And I think that's the area that the Supreme Court has got to clarify. And yeah, I guess it has the potential. It depends on how far they want to go. They often tend not to want to go any further than they have to decide a case. But in this case, perhaps they'll see it as an opportunity to clean up Pickering. There's some issues. I think parts of Pickering are pretty clear. The matter of public concern. In order to have First Amendment protection, it's got to be a matter of public concern. Number two, you've got to do it as a private citizen, and then it's the balancing test, which is problematic because that leaves it up to a judge, and you have the ability of a judge to go whatever direction they want to go on the balancing test. It's just really not. There's no clarity to the balancing test. So,
are you familiar? Because we'd be remiss if we didn't bring this up, especially while you're there. And if you're not completely familiar with the case, that's okay, because I haven't dove into it really deep yet.
Richie versus DeStefano.
No, yeah, that one I'm unfamiliar with. But we just had two paramedics criminally charged.
I am.
I'm somebody who's usually critical. I've been real critical of the union, especially in the COVID thing. But in this one, the union came out and gave a pretty powerful statement that I believe in. I think that it could have a chilling effect on care. I also think that there is a word of caution out of it just on its face, is that firefighters and medics are often intimidated by police officers. Mm-hmm. It's just a natural part, especially, as a kid, you view, and I'm a big supporter of the police, but you view the police as an authority figure. You become a paramedic, you're dealing with a stressful situation, making split-second decisions. You may be green or new, and a police officer says anything. You need to make sure that you're clear in your responsibility, that you're responsible for the patient. They may be responsible for the scene. And, a word of caution. And I always throw out when I talk about cops is when I would get a patient in New Haven, I learned a long time ago, I'd always ask the cop, did you frisk the person? Did you search them? And because paramedics think, oh, the cops did their job because they're standing around, especially when it's a crime scene. And I actually had a case with an assault with a guy on a bed, and the cops were standing around. And I said, does he have any weapons on him? And the cop said, we didn't frisk him. And the guy said, oh, I have a gun. Good to know. Good to know. We treat everybody with respect, but if we're at a crime scene, we want to make sure that the person we're putting in the ambulance has no weapons on him. It's as long as you're consistent with asking that question, it's worth. So is there words of wisdom to the paramedics who's listening to a cop when it comes to actual patient care?
Well, I think we get two issues. What do we do? What do we do when we have police on the scene? But I think I just want to say I'm heartbroken over that decision in Aurora. I think it's. I didn't listen to all the testimony, so I'm not privy to all the things that they're alleged to have done wrong. But from what I've seen, they made a mistake. I don't think it arises to the level of criminality. I just don't see it. But again, maybe there's some other things that we're not privy to that the jury heard. But I'm very concerned about the impact that it's going to have on other people, not just administering care, but I'm talking about a more fundamental issue of even remaining in the profession and people wanting to join the profession. It's a reality that we're not librarians. My neighbor is a librarian. When she makes a mistake, a book ends up on the wrong shelf. When we make a mistake, people end up needing a funeral. Their houses, are destroyed. Their property, everything they've worked for is destroyed. So there's consequences in what we do. And when one of the consequences of making a mistake is going to jail, I'm not sure people are going to want to do that. And I think police are dealing with that now, that people don't want to be police officers. They're not with it. Jobs where they used to get 2,000 applicants, they're getting 200 applicants, and fire departments to the same extent. So I think there's a social justice movement, but I don't think they fully thought through the ramifications of some of the things that they're advocating for. And I think we're seeing that on a broader scale. I know we don't want to get too political here, but we've got some issues, and this concerns us and our ability to recruit people and retain people. And I can see medics turning in their medic card, say, you know what, I think I'll go ride backwards on an engine. I don't need this. And that
it's a
concerns
tragedy
me.
that it's an absolute tragedy that the
Yeah.
patient lost their lives. But that was
Absolutely.
definitely not the intention of those medics. Their intention was not to cause harm. One of the things that I see in this case is, depending on what the Court of Appeals does, this could be a watershed moment, because police officers are routinely sued for every decision they ever make.
Absolutely.
And paramedics and EMTs have been kind of given a little bit more latitude, where they focus on retraining. They make sure that the person's competent, that they know that their intention is always to help people. But I don't think the legal profession has really shined a spotlight. And then now that this is here, I think you're going to see other cases where they're going to look at the police, and now let's look and see if there's any criminality or civil liability to go after the paramedic as an individual. So we could actually see a trend come out of a tragedy,
It's there.
losing the patient, and the other
It's
tragedy.
there. It's there. I've already seen it. I've alerted, I do some work with Lexapol and some other folks, so I've alerted them to this fact. But we've got a huge bump ever since the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson. We've seen a huge increase in the number of civil suits against firefighters and EMS personnel, in cases where either a suspect is killed or a suspect has suffered some sort of severe injury. But it's just an exponential increase in the lawsuits. And here's what I think is happening. Number one, whenever there's an arrest that results, or an apprehension, or a person having an emotional breakdown that requires police and EMS to be on the scene, and it doesn't turn out well for the person, there are civil rights attorneys that are coming in, and it's, just like we have our conferences, we have FDIC and different things. Civil rights attorneys have conferences, and they share tips and they share things to look for and so on. And what they're doing is there's a lot of body cam footage, which I'm a big advocate for. We should have body cam footage, okay? But what they're doing is they're going through the body cam footage, the 20 police officers on scene, and they're going through it literally frame by frame. And they're noticing that there's someone else besides police officers on the scene, namely us. And then this is where it gets really bad. They're looking at our EMS report, and the EMS report is saying, took the patient's pulse, took their respirations, took their blood pressure, patient declined aid, refused to sign, and all that stuff. And the medics didn't go anywhere near the person.
That's called vital vision, Kirk. A lot of firefighters have that skill.
Well,
120 over 80 and 100.
Yeah.
So what's happening now is these civil rights attorneys are looking at the report, they're looking at the video and going, wait a minute, they didn't do anything for that person. We're going to add them to the lawsuit. And they're getting traction on that. And I think that, if you kind of put that on the shelf for a second here, on the other side, we've got medical directors who periodically go through runs, they audit runs, they call the medics in and say, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you better be doing this, you better be doing that. And so the medics, instead of actually doing what they should be doing, just write it down that they did it. They just say they did it because they know if they don't, they're going to get in trouble with the medical director. Okay, which shouldn't be happening. I'm not saying it shouldn't be happening, but it's happening.
And it's also not just the police camera. You got to realize everybody has either a Ring doorbell or some kind of recording doorbell. They got a Siri in their house. You're being recorded. Anytime you go into somebody's house, not even for a medical, you go into somebody's house for food on the stove, you have to just realize that you're being recorded all the time as a firefighter, and you could be providing the best service ever, but make an offhanded joke or a comment that could destroy the reputation and equity that your department built, but destroy your own reputation and actually cost you your job or discipline. So firefighters out there, you got to realize that it's not just the cop's body camera. It's everything is recording now.
Remember your comment about emails, okay? And even I just saw recently one of the issues with a police officer was a text that somebody mentioned that the person died, and the cop replied, "Ha ha." So somebody texted. So the attorney somehow got this police officer's text messages, and when he found out the person that they had arrested died, and typed in "ha ha," that came out in court. And that just looks, it looks horrendous.
And then if you have a bad run form where you didn't document everything just perfectly and something's out, and now you get a text message or a recording that then calls in your credibility, now no jury's going to believe anything that you have to say.
Your credibility shot. Yeah. So again, I don't know. I am not personally involved in any of that. I've been I've consulted with a couple of people on it, but I have grave concerns for the impact of that Aurora case on our ability to retain and recruit folks willing to do that. And I honestly, I can see people saying, you know what, I don't need this. I'll go ride backwards on an engine, or go be the Tillerman. I don't need it.
Well, the Tillerman's the best job in the city, so I mean,
BC's a pretty good job. BC's a pretty good job.
This is kind of keeping in line where we are now, but different from where we originally started. But you mentioned body camera footage, right? And I like body camera footage for the police officers. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts on that transitioning into the EMS world and then the fire world? I know that there's some fire marshals out there that are wearing body cameras now, which in their spot, I think I'm an advocate of that. I think that's a very good means for their protection of their department and themselves. But I think when we get into EMS, it may open up another can of worms where we start looking at privacy, because some of the things that EMTs and paramedics are doing, and now you're recording. What's your thoughts on that?
We got to separate taking and using. Okay, the taking of the video, I don't have a problem with. I think it's a good thing. I think it needs to be archived. And so the taking, I don't have a problem with. Okay. It's the sharing or the using of that, and who's going to use it, under what circumstances are they going to use it? Can we ensure that we're going to be able to archive it and not lose it? Because if you have it and then all of a sudden it's missing, now we've got a big problem. Okay. It's spoliation, and now it's off to the races when that happens. So we got to be very, very careful. But I think we're going to be a heck of a lot better off if we have the video and we've done things right than if not. And I know when I started driving apparatus in Providence and seeing the just ridiculous things that civilian drivers were doing in the city, just mind-boggling. And then you end up in an accident and you're trying to explain, and people are saying, there's no way they would have done something like that. If you had that dash cam footage back in the 70s and 80s, we would have been so much better off. I think we're still in that position where the footage most of the time is going to support us and support what we did. But it is also there to catch in the event that you did something inappropriate as well.
Curt, I don't know if you're aware of this, but in Connecticut's red light and sirens law, there's actually a line that, do you know what it means when a firefighter in Connecticut turns on their red lights and sirens? What it means to the public? Watch out for me. I'm about to do something stupid. So the officer sitting in the right seat and the driver should realize that, driving with due regard means actually driving with due regard, because you can't do anything if you don't get there.
I had an old time chief, and I was driving him one day, and he said, sometimes I think the only thing that siren is good for is making us deaf, because I don't think anybody hears it. But I think if we drive like that, just drive as close to driving as if you didn't have a siren and lights on, you're better off.
Well, you also got to look at what you're going to, how important it is, and how are you going to behave when you get there. Those are all things that should go into that thing. We had a battalion chief, Tommy Gould, who I loved. We were going to a fire and we saw him pull over on the side of the road. And then after the fire, I said, Chief, why'd you pull over? He goes, because I don't go there to make decisions for my company officers. I go there to make decisions for the 3rd and 4th due company officers. I want them to get the experience to set the table.
That's a good chief. That's a good chief.
he was the best chief, you know, because he let people grow into their position and everybody wanted to work for him. And I think that we always got to have that level of professionalism of why we're going and take care of people. What books do you have out now from fire engineering, and are you teaching at FDIC this year?
I'm not at FDIC, but I am. I do have legal considerations for fire and emergency services. It's in its 4th edition. Hey, there we go, 4th edition, and that's the only book I have a book on discipline that I haven't sold. I use it as part of my classes. That I've talked to Mark. I've talked to some of the folks there about possibly publishing, but it might be something that we do in the future. But right now, it's legal considerations is the only book.
Oh, that's great. And we'll have Mark put up a link to that on the show for legal considerations. Because like I said, if you want to be a good company officer, read it and stop making some of the mistakes. We just had I believe it was, I don't want to misspeak, but I believe it was out of Shelton, Connecticut. It was a police officer disciplinary case where the labor board ruled against the town because the individual who did the investigation, who was also the individual, so they did an investigation. They didn't just recommend that they violated these rules and discipline. They actually did the investigation and then was the prosecutor and the judge and the discipline. And I'm saying, how in this day and age is somebody can achieve make that mistake that they're going to do the investigation and then
they've never been trained, and it's it's basic due process law. I mean, it's nothing magical, but you just you cannot, you can't do it all. You can't be the victim. You can't be the complainant. You can't be the investigator, and you can't be the judge. I mean, it's just, they wouldn't allow it in court, and it shouldn't be happening discipline wise either. We've got to have some separation. Now, I always joke because I go over that in my discipline class, and very often there's a fire chief in the class that does the investigations and he serves as the adjudicator. Okay. And he goes, well, that's the way we've been doing it. I said, well, let me tell you something. In our legal system, you can't do that because the police and the prosecutors are on one side. So the people bringing the case are on one side. The defense is on the other side, and we have a neutral in the middle that's got to make the decision. Okay. Now, if you think that you can do the investigation and serve as the neutral, you would love China. You'd love, no, seriously, you would love, Russia does that. China does that. Turkey does that. I mean, there's plenty of countries out there. You might want to take a look at their legal systems, but in our legal system, the person who does the investigation and presents it, is on one side, and you've got to have a neutral in the middle. And that neutral can be the fire chief, but the fire chief can't have done the investigation. It's really as simple as that.
And we see that time and time again out there. So again, read these books, follow Curt on Twitter, and read through his legal summary so you don't got to read all the documents. But as a fire chief, a union official, you don't have to have all the right answers all the time, but you got to be able to ask the right questions. And for some reason, I see two problems in the fire service. One, most managers and officers see themselves as the highest paid firefighter. They don't want to manage. And then when it comes to administrative issues, they want to deal with it the same way they make decisions at a fire, like trying to make great decisions based off imperfect information. When I try to say it's like chess, when you see a good move administratively, look for a better one, and it's protect the process at all costs. Because if the union can't defend the act, something I don't mind saying I was brilliant at, I would destroy the process. And that's how I won all the time. And sometimes I'd sit at the other side of the table and personally think to myself, there's no way they can fall for this again, or there's no way they're going to make the same mistake again. And they do it over and over again. Take the ego out of your position and follow the process and get some training. Right, PJ?
Take training at your local state training academy. So So Chief, we always try to keep this right to that hour, especially during the daytime hour of the show. It's a little bit, try to really focus on the time. So we're just getting to that hour. So there's a couple things I want to mention before we finish up and turn it back to you and Frank to close the show out. First, I'd be remiss if we didn't mention FDIC 2024, April 15th to 20th in Indianapolis. It's a show that you've never been to. You should change that this year, right? We don't need to go into all the details. We're all very familiar with what FDIC is. Honestly, I think it's pretty cool that we have 3 fire engineering books and video authors on today in this one call. So Curt, legal considerations. It's not one of those books that I feel that I read from cover to cover, but I often find myself going into it to learn different pieces at different times. So I thank you for putting that together. You know, Frank's book, Command Presence, just recently always helps me, but just recently helped me with a local interview I just had to do and kind of being tactful with my quotes. So, Frank, thank you very much. I know we talked about that. And lastly, I think we must mention, David Rhodes, editor-in-chief, just wrote a great editorial. It's titled, "It Has Already Been a Year." And the focus was on the loss of Chief Halton, which was just over a year ago, which was December 19th. So it's a tough time of year, not just for the Halton family, for the fire engineering Clarion family, but also all of us. We all have people that weren't sitting around our tables during this holiday season. So it's a good time just to think about them a little bit and make sure that you're posting on social media appropriately at the same time. So, Curt, thank you for joining us today. Frank, as always, thanks for giving me this opportunity to join you each month. And I'll turn it back over to you guys to close us out.
Well, PJ, you always make me look good, and I'm going to give Curt the last word today. But the book that we put out, you mentioned 2 things that are important. One, we're talking about discipline and social media. There's a chapter on discipline and negotiations and crafting your message that PJ co-authored with me in the book Command Presence, Increase Your Influence. And also, I have a heavy heart that Bobby's not with us anymore. The last chapter in the book was written by Bobby Halton. It was his last published words that unfortunately he didn't get to see published, but he fought to get that book published. So I'd be real curious to see what Curt's take on what a union president and a labor fellow came up with for discipline and negotiations. But it's with a heavy heart, and Dave really hit it on the head with that editorial. Curt, we'll give you the last word of the day, and then we'll take it off. It's an honor to always have you on the show. You're welcome back anytime, because I'm sure we have different audiences, and I think it's important to follow what you're doing, because I think what you're doing really matters and is moving the fire service in the right direction and is only going to make a firefighter or an officer or a chief a better leader.
Well, I appreciate it, and one of the biggest challenges that I've sort of jumped into is fire service discipline. We've got a lot of obstacles between where we are now and where we really want to be, and I think standing in the middle is problems with discipline. There are some departments where discipline has been weaponized, and that's really unfortunate. And I think a lot of people, when they think about discipline, they think about weaponized systems, and they think that discipline training is about getting better at how to weaponize it against the people that you want to go after. And my training is the exact opposite of that. That we really need to get a better understanding about what a good discipline system is going to look like, how to do full and fair investigations. And I feel rewarded when union officials come to the classes. I feel disappointed when I have 50 or 60 people in a class and there's no union reps in the class, because I think a lot of times unions hear the word discipline, they don't want anything to do with it. And I want to encourage the union officials out there. I'm making an assumption here that with Frank here, that there's going to be a lot of union folks listening in, is that if union reps do not know what a good disciplinary process and a good disciplinary investigation looks like, the fire departments will not do those good disciplinary investigations. The union has got to hold them accountable. So I want to encourage union folks to pay attention to this issue. There are solutions out there. There are systems out there that can improve the way that discipline is going to be administered, and in that way save people's jobs by making some things clear and by not allowing a disciplinary system to become weaponized. And I think there's an awful lot of our civil litigation that in the fire service that is HR related, and it's often discipline related. It's discipline related in sexual harassment cases because the department has failed to deal with the party that is perpetrating it. It's a lot of our litigation is people being disciplined and then suing because they were disciplined. So an awful lot of it is tied up there. Believe it or not, only about 25% of our litigation is coming from incidents. Okay, somewhere 60 to 70, depending on how you parse the numbers, 60 to 70% of our litigation is HR related.
That's very well said. And I just want to hit on one last point, especially because we're doing the union and the management side here. The union, yes, you have to view discipline as wins and losses because you're essentially the defense attorney protecting the process. Management, because they come through the ranks, often falls into the trap of looking at discipline as wins and losses instead of an honest search for the truth and facts. And I've seen it across the country. Instead of just saying, okay, this is the issue I got, they automatically, I want managers to back their officers if they followed their procedures correctly, 100%, and they're trained right. But I want you to do a search for the truth and the fact, protect the process, and it'll all come out. It's not whether you win or lose, because often management doubles down on a bad hand, which ends up costing the taxpayers exponentially because they double down on a bad hand. The last thing I'm going to say for the fire chief, the worst thing that you can do that we see them do time and time again is say, I want my hands off this investigation, so I'm going to bring in an outside law firm, but then I'm going to tell the outside law firm what my position is. And the outside law firm is going to double down on that bad position, costing the taxpayers more money. If you're bringing in an outside law firm, ask them to evaluate the facts and make a recommendation before the case even starts, because it may be something you just want to settle, which would save everything. Because there's nothing worse than a leader who loses to the union. It immediately diminishes their own command and their own credibility. It's about protecting your credibility, protect the process, protect due process. And I think, Curt, you said it great. We don't want to be Russia. We don't want to be China, because Russia and China both have a Bill of Rights. The thing that makes it different is America has separation of powers, has due process to protect that Bill of Rights. And we need to make sure that's enshrined and protected. Honor to have you on. It's always an honor to have PJ on this show as a co-host, because he always makes me look better, keeps me on track, because I totally forgot about the show and wouldn't even been on today. So PJ, I love you. Merry Christmas to both of you individuals. Take us off, and thank you for all you do for the fire service, Curt.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Everybody, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.